Hey guys, I'm back with you. We're on the second video. This segment we're going to concentrate on this choke assembly, and we're going to talk about the two different kinds of choke assemblies you'll see. They're basically just two types. There's what's called a hot air choke and a non-hot air. It's called an electric choke. Or electric, technically it's electric assist, but it's basically the same thing. So, the two types of chokes. Let's start off with a hot air type choke, which you see this is a hot air choke in front of you. Now, why it's called a hot air choke is because there's a spring in it. Any kind of choke mechanism has a spring. That's what has loaded this to close it. Okay, so let's take another carburetor that I have here and disassemble this and let you see what's in here. Now this is the same kind of choke. This is a hot air choke. You see, you can always tell a hot air choke because it's one thing, it has a threaded connection. Can you see this here? See, this one has it. It's got a orifice in it. So what a hot air choke does is it unwinds the spring in here, which I'm about to show you, unwinds because of hot air. Of course, the longer the engine runs, it warms up, and that's what any choke has to have some method to warm it up to unload it. So I'm going to briefly set this aside here. I'm covering a lot of things here. I'm trying to remember. I don't like to edit videos together, so let me do a quick diagram for you to show you. This is a hot air choke, has some different lines and things, and a heat stove, you know, on the manifold, and some lines run around. A lot of people don't know what those are, and they don't know how to connect them and route them. So first thing we're going to do, let's say we have the carburetor here, choke assembly here. Alright, next, this is a hot air, like I just told you, hot air choke. That means it uses heated air to unwrap the choke spring in here. Okay, so what you'll have is you'll have connector, which we just saw here, and then on the intake manifold of the engine you'll have a little thing here that has two connections on it. It's a piece of metal sitting in the intake manifold, has two connections. Alright, one of these connections will go directly connect to the heat stove, choke stove on the carburetor. Choke housing, excuse me. It's been a long day, guys. Sorry about that. Alright. Then the other one will have either a metal line or a rubber. You can use a rubber line. Doesn't really matter. You need to use metal. They came factory with metal lines, but try to use that if possible. And it will go somewhere to the carburetor. Now, Oldsmobile carburetors, you'll usually always see a little nipple on the air horn at the top, at the back here, that looks like a vacuum connection. Now you need to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you here, because that's an easy mistake to make. But if you ever look in there, it's not a vacuum connection. It's just it's open to air. Actually, it comes up like this one does. Well, right here. This looks like a vent, bowl vent, or looks like a vacuum connection. But what this is a fresh air connection. You need to be sure that's what it is. Some of them may have a vacuum connection, but usually always all it is a connection into the atmosphere inside the air cleaner. So what this does is you got your two connections up here on the little heat stove on the intake. Well, the part you don't see that goes down into the intake kind of loops around, and it comes around like this. This is a piece of metal tubing, and you'll see it makes a circuit. Alright, now can you tell what that's going to do? How this works is, pay very close attention to this. These choke housing, these hot air choke housing, like this one and like this one, like all of them, have a what's called a metered air bleed in it. Air bleed. It comes through the body of the carburetor back here. It's a very small, just a little drilled channel in here that leads into this spring chamber. And this has a vacuum, of course, signal to it because it's a vacuum bleed. And when the engine starts running, of course, it gets a vacuum signal at idle, so it starts pulling fresh air from this source here. Comes down through here, comes around, enters one side of this heat stove. This is down in the intake. It's actually in the exhaust crossover on a V8 engine. We are referring to a V8. If you have a V6, it's the same. Straight 6 is probably a different choke setup altogether, so I can't vouch for that. But comes around, gets heated up, gets pretty damn hot. Then when it comes back out the other side here, it leads into this short piece of line that goes up to this choke housing. So it's got pretty hot air coming in here, and then it gets sucked into the carburetor channel, and of course down into the engine. You know, it's gone. So that's how it works. That's how this choke unloads. You know, it's a bimetallic spring, and that's how it unwraps. It doesn't have any other type of heat source on this. That's why it's essential to, if you have a hot air choke, like you have a Buick or some Buicks or Pontiacs or Oldsmobiles are the ones that usually always have this kind of choke assembly, then it's imperative that this system is it's in one piece, because if you have a rusted out line in here or a rusted out non-misting line here, non-misting line here, it ain't gonna do shit, because it's not gonna suck air through this system. Now up here, a lot of people may make the mistake of thinking, well, this needs to go to a vacuum line right here. Don't do that, because this is your vacuum source. Up here, this ain't nothing. This needs to be, you could actually take this off and let this hang out tied up somewhere, as long as the end of that is open to the atmosphere. It just has to get air, fresh air into it, not a vacuum signal, because a vacuum signal and vacuum signal are going to fight each other, and there's going to be no airflow through this, and the choke will never unload. I mean, it'll stay closed up like this all damn day. So just be sure pull this thing out and look at it, and make sure it's not rusted away. You know, you can find Oldsmobiles, you can find a bunch of 307s, things like that. You can find replacements for them. They're pretty easy still to find. So now, I said leave this open to the atmosphere. That you really don't need to leave this open to the atmosphere, because it's being sucked into the engine. So you need, if you couldn't find out where it goes, had a different carburetor or whatever, just couldn't find the fitting, you weren't sure, then take a little piece of like foam or something like that and glue on the end of it, and you can leave it hang out, as long as it has some sort of filtration. You don't want it to suck dirt through that system into the carburetor. Now, these things they have to be sealed. I'm not going to take this one apart here in a minute, but I'll tell you here, when you ever take this choke housing right here off, then there's a rubber O-ring that goes, there's a little shaft goes through, and there's a rubber O-ring that sits in here in the carburetor body. Be sure you put that back in, because if you don't, that will interrupt your seal, and again, you'll not draw air through this system. Just a very simple little rubber seal. All the rebuild kits come with them now. And so let's take a look at this inside of this housing here, so you may get a better idea of what we're looking at. I'm going to put the camera down for a second. Alright, I think I can do this one-handed. I got my tripods out from the shop in there, and I don't feel like going and getting it, so just kind of bear with me. Okay, you got 3 screws on this, so we'll just take these loose. You have to take them all the way out, because it's got this little funky washer. Always hang on to these if you got the originals. The rebuild kits come with different washers and different screws, but they're The ones that come in the kits are these silly ass self-tapping screws, and they screw up the little housing and everything. You don't need to use them if you don't have to, because these are different. These are a different thread pitch altogether. Here's a word of caution: when you're dealing with one of these things, these little washers, little elongated washers that hold this plastic deal in place, they can be bent. They're supposed to be, see how this one is a little bit, the ends are kind of bent down on it, it sits on this. That's right, you can bend these arms down and make them hold this a lot tighter. You don't tighten the damn bolts on these things as hard as you can, because this is just pot metal. This is just pot metal, and the first thing will happen when you got your big ass screwdriver on this thing trying to tighten them in to get this thing from, stop it from turning, is you'll strip it, or you'll break the whole end of it off and you'll ruin it. So the key to this, pay very close attention to what I'm saying here. I almost sound like Rush Limbaugh. Pay attention because I'm right, but I am right in this case. I've done it before. Bend the ends of these things down more, and that way it'll hold it very well, solid as rock, and you don't have to keep tightening the crap out of these bolts to get it to hold. So just trying to save you guys some problems down the road here. Alright, let's pull this one out. I don't know if it's ever been out before. Some water in it. Okay, that's what's inside of it. It has ignore the mess. It has a metal housing, and then it's got the spring there. This is just a normal bimetallic spring. It's like in any kind of thermostat, that type of a deal. Just a little bit chunkier. And then that arm we just saw acts on this piece of linkage here, which acts on the rest of the choke linkage. It activates the choke plate. Now let's see, I think, not sure where it's at, it may be, I think if you look, if I can focus on it, see that hole right there, not the one to the left, not that one, looks like it's been drilled, but that one, that hole, I think that's your vacuum feed in here. Now that's the bolt that you take off to take the whole thing off, the flat one, and that's the bolt right there, the screw that you just take the linkage off with. Now there's another thing you have to pay attention to on these hot air chokes. So these hot air chokes are complicated, aren't they? They're not really, but they can be if you don't know what you're doing. These things have a gasket to seal this, and this one actually still has it. Let me show it to you here. See this? Be sure, if you service this choke assembly, be sure you put the new gasket, or the old one if it's still okay, back on this. If you do not, it will cause a air leak, a vacuum leak, and then your choke system that I showed you how it worked here won't work anymore. So now, to put this thing back in, you just find where your little notch is right there. See that? Find that, and then kind of get it this way of that thing. So you just kind of, you start kind of low, and then it will, as you see, it will catch it at some point. You'll feel it start to resist. I can feel it there. So that's how you reset those. So that's how the hot air automatic choke system works on a variety of cars. This is a Quadrajet, as you can see, obviously, but that's the basis of it. That's how it works. So I'm gonna end this video clip, and then in the next video clip we'll look at a little bit of electric choke operation and talk about how that works. See ya.